They handed me a suitcase on my 74th birthday and told me I had an hour to pack. My own son stood there watching his face blank as fresh concrete while his wife tapped her manicured nails against the door frame like she was counting down my remaining seconds in the house I'd built with these hands. What happened next didn't just destroy them. It changed everything about how families betray each other in America, and by the time I was done, 3 people were dead, 2 were in federal prison, and 1 old man learned that revenge tastes exactly like your morning coffee, bitter, necessary, and best served cold. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times. 4:30 on October 15th, 2023. The sound bounced off walls I'd painted myself, echoing through rooms where I'd raised my boy, where I'd held my dying wife's hand, where I'd foolishly believed blood meant something more than convenience. The suitcase hit the hardwood floor with a thud that seemed to shake the foundation. Navy blue vinyl with silver corners, the kind they sell at discount stores. The same floor I'd installed board by board in 1979, my knees grinding against sawdust. Eleanor bringing me sweet tea in mason jars while Danny played with his toy trucks between the planks. My throat closed up. Not with tears, I was past tears, but with something thicker, more dangerous. The taste of copper pennies flooded my mouth, metallic and sharp, the way fear tastes when it's mixed with rage that's been simmering for months. Melissa's perfume hung in the air like a chemical cloud. White diamonds, she'd told me once, proud, as if expensive meant classy. Now it burned my nostrils, synthetic flowers masking something rotting underneath. She was still tapping that rhythm against the doorframe. Click, click, pause, click. A funeral march played on wood in impatience. The nursing facility has a bed available today. She said, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a knife blade. Sunset Manor, they're expecting you by 6. The words didn't bounce off me. They soaked in like rain through cracked concrete, seeping deep, carrying poison to places that should have been protected by love, by history, by the simple understanding that you don't throw away the man who gave you everything. Daniel's breathing was shallow behind her. I could hear it from 10 feet away, that quick panting he'd done as a child when he was caught in a lie. The same sound he'd made when I found him with my toolbox trying to trade my good socket wrench for comic books. Except now he was 42 and he was trading me. The house suddenly felt smaller, the ceiling pressing down like we were inside a coffin being nailed shut. Every photograph on the wall seemed to be watching. Daniel's first day of school, Eleanor in her wedding dress, 3 generations of men who'd never abandoned their blood. The glass in the frames caught the afternoon light, throwing tiny rainbows that danced across surfaces that would never be mine to dust again. My chest tightened. Not a heart attack. I'd had one of those 2 years ago, knew the difference. This was something else entirely. This was the physical sensation of being erased while still breathing. The suitcase gaped open like a hungry mouth. Melissa had already started filling it. My underwear, my reading glasses, the bottle of pills that kept my blood pressure stable. She handled each item like evidence in a case she'd already won, her fingers clinical, detached, efficient. The pocket watch in my vest grew warm against my ribs. Silver metal heated by body heat and fury, ticking steady as a time bomb. My father's voice echoed from 40 years ago. Time reveals character, Harold. You just need to be patient enough to watch it work. Feel patient. The word felt like a joke now. I'd been patient when Melissa started reorganizing Eleanor's china cabinet. Patient when she convinced Daniel that my evening news was too loud, too depressing, too inconvenient for their lifestyle. Patient when she began referring to my bedroom as the guest room in front of her book club friends. The floorboards groaned under my feet. Old house settling or maybe buckling under the weight of what was happening. Each creak sounded like a protest, like the house itself was trying to object to my eviction from the walls I'd built, the rooms I'd filled with 46 years of memories. Melissa's jewelry clinked as she moved, cheap metal trying to sound expensive. The sound grated against my eardrums like fingernails on blackboard. Everything about her was imitation masquerading as quality. Her laugh, her concern, her promises when Daniel brought her home that first Christmas. You'll be happier there. She continued not looking at me while she folded my shirts with the same care she'd show to dirty laundry. People your own age, activities, professional care. Professional care. The words tasted like sawdust and betrayal. I'd given Daniel professional care for 18 years, food, shelter, education, unconditional love. I'd given him the down payment for his first house, co-signed his car loan when his credit was garbage, paid for Melissa's dental work when her insurance wouldn't cover it. The return on that investment was standing in my doorway with a suitcase and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel's shadow fell across the threshold. He was backlit by the hallway light, his face obscured, but I could see his hands shaking. The same hands I'd taught to hold a hammer, to tie a fishing line, to shake like a man when meeting someone important. Now they trembled like autumn leaves ready to fall. "Dad," he said, and his voice cracked like it had when he was 13. I turned my head slow as winter molasses looked at him directly for the first time since they'd ambushed me with their plan. His eyes were red-rimmed, watery, but not with grief, with guilt. The kind of guilt that eats you from the inside but isn't strong enough to change your mind. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just my blood pressure spiking. The familiar furniture, Eleanor's rocking chair, the bookshelf I'd built from oak scraps, the TV we'd bought to watch the moon landing. Everything looked foreign, suddenly like props in someone else's play. My mouth opened but no sound came out. What do you say when your own blood decides you're disposable? What words exist for the moment your son chooses convenience over character? The pocket watch ticked louder now, or maybe my hearing had sharpened the way it does right before lightning strikes. Each tick was a countdown to something I couldn't name, yet something building in my chest like pressure in a boiler. Melissa zipped the suitcase closed. The sound was final as a judge's gavel, sharp as the snap of breaking bone. "There," she said, satisfied. "All packed." The sound of that zipper closing was the last normal thing that happened in my house. I stood there for exactly 37 seconds. I counted them, the pocket watch steady in my palm, watching my son avoid my eyes while his wife smoothed down the corners of my life like she was gift-wrapping garbage. Then I smiled. Not the grandfather smile they expected, not the defeated shuffle of an old man accepting his fate. Something else entirely. Something that made Melissa take a half-step backward, her manicured fingers suddenly still against the doorframe. "You know what, honey?" I said, my voice steady as concrete foundation. "You're right. I should go somewhere with people my own age." Daniel's head snapped up, confusion flickering across his face like candlelight in wind. This wasn't the script they'd written. Old men were supposed to cry, to beg, to cling to what little dignity remained. They weren't supposed to smile. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on hardwood I'd laid with these hands. The phone hung where Eleanor had insisted it belonged for 23 years. Close enough to the stove for her to stir soup while talking to her sister, far enough from the table that dinner conversations stayed sacred. The receiver felt warm in my palm as I dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 months. Hartman, Kessler and Associates. "This is Harold Morrison. I need to speak with Greg. Tell him it's time." 2 words. That's all it took. The secretary's voice sharpened with recognition. Greg Hartman had been waiting for this call since Eleanor's funeral, when we'd sat in his office and planned for every contingency except the one where my family would grow a conscience. "He'll be right with you, Mr. Morrison." Behind me, I could hear whispered arguments. Melissa's voice was climbing toward that frequency that made dogs howl. Daniel was making the soft grunting sounds he'd made as a child when he was trying not to cry. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath. "Harold." Greg's voice carried 40 years of friendship and professional competence. "They did it. They did. Jesus, even after everything we discussed, I hoped." He sighed, the sound of a man who'd seen too much human nature to be surprised by its depths. "How long do we have?" I checked the pocket watch. "They want me out by 6. Sunset Manor has a bed waiting." The laugh that came through the phone was sharp as broken glass. Sunset Manor, Christ Herald, they couldn't even spring for the good place. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door working in her garden. 78 years old and still pulling weeds like they'd personally insulted her. She'd been Eleanor's closest friend, the woman who'd brought casseroles during chemo treatments and held my hand at the funeral when I couldn't stop shaking. "Hi, Greg, I need you to make some calls. Already dialing. Give me 20 minutes. The line went dead. I hung up the receiver gently, the click echoing through the sudden silence that had fallen over the house. When I turned around, they were both staring at me. Daniel's face was pale as old paper. Melissa's mouth was open like a fish drowning in air. "Who was that?" she demanded. I walked past them without answering, my shoulder brushing Daniel's as I headed for the stairs. The banister was smooth under my palm, worn by decades of hands. Mine Eleanor's, Daniel's, when he was small enough to need help reaching the top step. My bedroom was exactly as I'd left it this morning. The bed made with military corners, Eleanor's photograph on the nightstand, the book I'd been reading marked with a scrap of paper torn from yesterday's obituaries. Everything neat, organized, ready for a man who planned to be here tomorrow and the day after that. I opened the closet door and pushed aside the winter coats Eleanor had insisted I keep, even though Virginia winters were mild compared to the Minnesota cold we'd both grown up with. Behind them, wrapped in a garment bag that smelled like mothballs and memories, hung my dress uniform. Army green wool brass buttons, tarnished but still gleaming ribbons and medals attached with the precision that had been beaten into me at Fort Benning 53 years ago. Purple Heart from Khoisan. Silver Star from the incident we weren't supposed to talk about, but all carried like shrapnel in our chests. Combat infantry badge that meant I'd look death in the face and live to tell about it. The uniform still fit. A little tight around the middle, looser in the shoulders where age had carved away muscle, but it fit. As I buttoned the jacket, I could feel something shifting inside me. Not just posture, though my spine straightened automatically. Something deeper. The civilian grandfather they'd been trying to discard was disappearing, replaced by the soldier who'd learned that some battles require preparation and others require immediate, decisive action. Footsteps on the stairs. Daniel's voice nervous and getting closer. "Dad, what are you doing up there?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser, pushed aside pajamas and undershirts until my fingers found what they were looking for. A manila envelope sealed and yellowed with age, Eleanor's handwriting on the front in fading blue ink. "For when they forget who you are." She'd given it to me 3 days before she died, when the morphine wasn't enough anymore, and her words came in whispers that barely stirred the air. I'd promised not to open it unless I had no choice. The seal cracked like ice breaking up in spring. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank statements, letters, and a single photograph that made my chest tighten like a fist around my heart. Daniel appeared in the doorway just as I was sliding everything back into the envelope. His face went white when he saw the uniform, whiter still when he noticed the envelope in my hands. "Dad, what is that?" I turned to face him, fully letting him see what he'd chosen to discard. 74 years old, but every inch the man who'd carried wounded soldiers through rice paddies, who'd built a construction business with nothing but determination and calloused hands, who'd loved his family enough to forgive betrayals that would have broken smaller men. "Insurance," I said simply. His eyes darted to the envelope, then back to my face. The guilt was eating him alive. I could see it in the way his hands shook, the way he couldn't meet my eyes for more than a heartbeat. "Dad, I know this looks bad, but Melissa's right. You need help. You need care. We can't..." "You can't what, Daniel?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. "Can't afford to keep me. Can't stand having me around. Can't wait for me to die quietly so you can sell this house and spend the money on whatever it is you think you deserve." Each word hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders hunched inward, his face crumpling with the weight of truths he'd been trying not to acknowledge. "It's not like that," he whispered. "And then tell me what it is like." But he couldn't, or wouldn't. Maybe there wasn't a difference anymore. Car tires crunched on gravel outside. Greg's Lincoln Continental probably, though it could have been the first of the other calls I'd asked him to make. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson still working in her garden, but her movements were slower now, more deliberate. She was listening. "You'd better go downstairs," I told Daniel. "Your wife's about to get an education." The doorbell rang as I was adjusting my ribbons. The sound echoed through the house like a church bell announcing the start of services. I heard Melissa's heels clicking across hardwood, heard the front door open, heard her voice go from annoyed to confused to something approaching panic in the space of 3 sentences. "May I help you?" "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Detective Sarah Kowalski, Arlington County Police. We'd like to speak with your father-in-law." The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I walked downstairs, each step measured and deliberate. The living room was full of people now. Greg in his expensive suit, a woman in a police blazer who looked like she could bench press a Buick, and another man I didn't recognize wearing the kind of cheap tie that screamed government employee. Melissa was pressed against the wall, her face the color of old paper. Daniel stood behind her, his mouth hanging open like he was trying to catch flies. "Hey, Harold." Greg's voice carried satisfaction and something that might have been pride. "I'd like you to meet Detective Kowalski and Agent Morrison from the FBI. Agent Morrison, no relation, just one of those cosmic jokes that felt like divine intervention." "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, nodding to each in turn. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Detective Kowalski was studying my uniform with the trained eye of someone who knew what those ribbons meant. "Mr. Morrison, we understand there may have been some elder abuse occurring in this residence." The words hit the room like lightning. Melissa actually whimpered, a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Daniel grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. "That's correct," I said calmly. "I have documentation." I held out the envelope Eleanor had left me. Detective Kowalski took it with the careful handling of someone who understood that evidence was sacred, that some pieces of paper could destroy lives or save them. As she opened it and began reading, her expression changed. Professional interest became focused attention, became something approaching anger. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, not looking up from the papers. 8 years, I said, "since they moved in." Agent Morrison was writing everything down in a notebook that had seen better decades. "And you have financial records, every transaction, every forged signature. Every time they used my credit cards without permission, every utility bill they convinced me to put in my name while they ran up debt in theirs." I could hear my voice getting stronger, more confident as I spoke. "My late wife was very thorough about documentation. Eleanor had been a bookkeeper before we married, had kept records like a medieval monk copying scripture. Every receipt, every bill, every check stub filed and organized with the precision of a Swiss watch. After she got sick, when she realized what Melissa was slowly, carefully doing to our finances, she'd started keeping different kinds of records. Evidence, the kind that would hold up in court." Detective Kowalski looked up from the papers, her eyes hard as flint. "Mrs. Morrison, I need you and your husband to sit down. We have some questions." Melissa's legs gave out. She slumped into Eleanor's chair, my dead wife's chair that she'd claimed as her own months ago, and began to cry. Not the pretty tears of movies, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone watching their world collapse in real time. Daniel was still standing, swaying slightly like a tree in strong wind. His face had gone beyond pale into something approaching gray. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What's happening?" Agent Morrison looked up from his notes. "Sir, you're both being investigated for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Depending on what we find, there could be federal charges related to mail fraud and wire fraud as well." The words filled the room like toxic gas. Daniel's knees buckled. He grabbed for the wall mist and sat down hard on the floor. The sound he made wasn't quite human, somewhere between a moan and a whimper. The nursing home was just the final step. I said, my voice carrying through their shock like a bell through fog. but the financial abuse has been going on for years. Detective Kowalski was flipping through pages now, her expression growing darker with each revelation. Credit cards opened in your name without your knowledge. Utility bills transferred to your account. Property tax payments delayed to generate late fees that went into accounts you didn't have access to. Each item was like a nail in their coffin. Melissa's sobs were getting louder, more desperate. Daniel had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. There's more," I said quietly. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a micro recorder, the kind they sell at electronics stores for business meetings. Digital voice activated, capable of storing hours of conversation in perfect clarity. Eleanor gave me this before she died, asked me to keep it with me just in case. I held it up so everyone could see. It's been recording automatically for 2 years. The silence that followed was complete. Even Melissa stopped crying, her breath catching in her throat. Every insult, every planning session, every time you thought I was asleep or out of the house or too senile to understand what you were discussing. I clicked play. Melissa's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably cruel. "He's got to have at least 200,000 in that savings account. Once we get him declared incompetent, we can access everything. The house alone is worth 400 grand. Daniel's voice weaker but complicit. "Are you sure this is the right thing to do? He's useless, Danny. He's already lived longer than most people. We deserve this money more than he does. We're young, we have plans, we have a future. What's he going to do with it? Take it to the grave?" The recording continued for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. When I clicked it off, the silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Agent Morrison closed his notebook. "Mr. Morrison, we'll need to take your statement and collect all of this evidence." "Mrs. Morrison." "Mr. Morrison, you have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warnings felt like justice finally finding its voice. Melissa was handcuffed first, still sobbing, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. Daniel went quietly, his face blank with shock, his hands limp as fish when they cuffed him behind his back. As they were led out of my house built with my hands and my money and my dreams, Daniel turned back one last time. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. This stranger wearing my son's face, this man who'd forgotten every lesson I'd tried to teach him about honor and loyalty and what it meant to be a man. "I know you are Danny," I said softly. "But sorry doesn't give me back 8 years. The door closed behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Greg stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder as we watched the police cars pull out of the driveway. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. I pulled out the pocket watch, checked the time. 5:47. 13 minutes before they'd expected me to be locked away in Sunset Manor disappeared from their lives like an inconvenient memory. "Since the day Eleanor died," I said. "She made me promise to protect myself if it came to this. She knew what they were even when I didn't want to see it." Mrs. Patterson was at her fence now, openly watching. When she caught my eye, she raised her hand in a small wave. Not sympathy, not pity. Respect. "What happens now?" Greg asked. I looked around my living room at the furniture Eleanor and I had bought together, at the walls we'd painted, at the life we'd built that I'd almost let them steal. Now I smiled, and for the first time in months it felt genuine. Now I call Sunset Manor and tell them they can give that bed to someone who actually needs it. The house felt different after they took Daniel and Melissa away. Bigger somehow, like rooms that had been holding their breath were finally able to expand. The air moved differently, too cleaner, no longer thick with Melissa's perfume and the stench of their lies. I was still wearing the dress uniform when Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door at 7:15. She stood on my porch with a casserole dish in her hands and steel in her eyes, looking like a grandmother who'd declare war on hell itself if it threatened her family. "Harold Morrison," she said without preamble, "you magnificent son of a bitch." I'd never heard her curse before. In all the years she and Eleanor had been friends through bridge games and book clubs and shared sorrows, she'd maintained the polite vocabulary of a woman raised on scripture and good manners. But standing there with twilight gathering around her shoulders, she looked like an avenging angel who'd learned to swear in the army. "May I come in?" The casserole was tuna and noodles, the same dish she'd brought after Eleanor's funeral. It smelled like comfort and continuity, like the knowledge that some things endure when others fall apart. "I heard the sirens," she said, settling into Eleanor's chair like she had every right to it. "Then I saw them leading those two away in handcuffs. About time." I was still standing still, processing the strange emptiness that comes after a battle ends. The uniform felt heavy now, not with authority, but with exhaustion. "How much did you know?" I asked. Her laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Harold, I've lived next door to you for 23 years. You think I didn't notice when that girl started treating you like hired help? You think Eleanor and I never talked about what was happening?" She leaned forward, her eyes sharp as broken glass. "Eleanor came to see me 2 days before she died. Sat in my kitchen for 3 hours crying and planning and making me promise to watch out for you. She knew what was coming." The words hit me like physical blows. Eleanor had known, had seen what I was too blind or too hopeful to acknowledge, had made plans to protect me from our own son. "She left you something else," Mrs. Patterson continued, reaching into her purse. "Asked me to give it to you when the time was right." The envelope was small, cream-colored, my name written in Eleanor's careful script. Inside was a key and a slip of paper with an address I didn't recognize. "Safety deposit box," Mrs. Patterson explained. "At First National downtown. She's been putting things aside for years." My hands shook as I held the key. More evidence, more proof of betrayal, more ammunition for a war I'd never wanted to fight. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "About Daniel." The way she said his name made my chest tighten. Not anger, not disappointment, but something softer and more devastating. "He came to see me last month, drunk, crying, talking about how he'd lost his way. How he knew what they were doing was wrong but couldn't figure out how to stop it." I sat down heavily in my recliner, the leather sighing under my weight. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was never too late to do the right thing. That his mother raised him better than that. That you deserved better than what they were giving you. And," her face crumpled slightly, "he said he was in too deep. That Melissa would leave him if he didn't go along with her plans. That he'd rather hurt you than lose her." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. My son had chosen his wife over his father, had chosen comfort over character, had looked at the man who'd raised him and decided I was disposable. "I should have stopped it then," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Should have called the police, called you, done something. But Eleanor made me promise to let you handle it your way. She knew I needed to see it all the way through," I said quietly. "Needed to understand exactly what they were capable of." We sat in silence for a while. Two old people watching the darkness gather outside windows that had witnessed decades of smaller sorrows and greater joys. The casserole grew cold on the coffee table between us, but neither of us moved to put it away. The phone rang at 8:30. Greg's voice was tired but satisfied. "A preliminary hearing is set for Thursday. They're both being held without bond. Melissa because she's a flight risk, Daniel because the prosecutor thinks he might try to contact you." "Will he?" "Harold, your son is looking at federal charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse conspiracy. Melissa's looking at the same plus identity theft and forgery. Their lawyer is going to push for a plea deal." I thought about Daniel sitting in a cell, probably crying, probably wondering how his life had collapsed so quickly. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. The father in me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle and helping with algebra homework, that part ached with grief. But the man who'd built this house, who'd served his country, who'd loved his wife through sickness and health and death, that man felt something colder. Justice. Consequences. the natural result of choices made with full knowledge of their weight. What kind of plea deal depends on what else we find in that safety deposit box. If Eleanor documented everything the way I think she did, they're going to want to minimize their exposure. After Greg hung up, Mrs. Patterson and I finished the casserole in comfortable silence. She washed the dishes while I changed out of the uniform, hanging it carefully in the closet where it would wait for the next battle. When she left, the house settled around me like an old coat, familiar and welcoming. I walked through the room, slowly touching surfaces that were mine again, breathing air that was no longer poisoned with resentment and greed. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way Eleanor had taught me. Strong enough to wake the dead, sweet enough to make life bearable. As it brewed, I thought about the safety deposit box, about what other secrets my wife had hidden to protect me. The phone rang again at 10:15. Mr. Morrison. The voice was young, female, uncertain. This is Jennifer Walsh from the Washington Post. I understand there was an incident at your home today involving elder abuse charges. News traveled fast in small towns. Someone had talked. Probably one of the neighbors who'd seen the police cars, the handcuffs, the drama playing out on my front lawn. I don't have anything to say to the press, I said. Sir, I think this story could help other seniors who are facing similar situations. Elder abuse is a growing problem, and your case could... Ma'am, I interrupted. My family's troubles are not your headlines. I hung up, but the damage was done. The phone rang 6 more times before I unplugged it from the wall. This was just the beginning. Once word got out about the charges, about the recordings, about the systematic way Melissa and Daniel had planned to strip me of everything, there would be more calls, more reporters, more people wanting to turn my pain into their story. I walked to the front window and looked out at the street I'd called home for 46 years. Porch lights were coming on in houses where families were settling in for the night. Normal families. Families where children honored their parents and daughters-in-law didn't plot to steal inheritance money. But even those families would be talking about what had happened here. Around dinner tables and over backyard fences, they'd be whispering about Harold Morrison and how his son had tried to steal his house. Some would sympathize. Others would wonder what I'd done to deserve it. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my palm, marking time that suddenly felt precious again. Time that belonged to me, not to their expectations or demands or schemes. Tomorrow I would go to the bank and open Eleanor's final gift. Tomorrow I would learn just how deep their betrayal went, how long my wife had been preparing for this war. Tomorrow I would decide what kind of man I wanted to be in the aftermath of victory. But tonight I was just Harold Morrison, sitting in his own house drinking coffee his dead wife had taught him to make, listening to silence that sounded like freedom. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times, and for the first time in 8 years, no one told me it was too loud. The safety deposit box was bigger than I'd expected. Eleanor had rented the largest size available, and when the bank manager turned both keys and lifted the metal lid, I understood why. 3 thick manila folders, each labeled in her careful handwriting: financial records, correspondence, and insurance. Below them, a smaller envelope marked "For Harold's Eyes Only," and a leather journal I'd never seen before. I sat in the privacy booth with 46 years of marriage spread across a small table, my hands shaking as I opened the first folder. Bank statements going back 5 years, but not accounts I recognized. Credit cards in my name that I'd never applied for. Loan applications with my forged signature, a systematic paper trail of theft that must have taken months to compile. The correspondence folder was worse. Emails between Melissa and companies I'd never heard of, using my social security number and personal information to open accounts, transfer funds, redirect mail. She'd been stealing from me since before Eleanor died, just waiting for the right moment to make her final move. But the insurance folder, that's where Eleanor had shown her genius. Every conversation they thought was private had been recorded. Not just the device I'd carried, but a system Eleanor had installed throughout the house after her diagnosis. smoke detectors with hidden microphones, bookshelf cameras disguised as decorative spines, motion-activated recorders tucked behind picture frames. For 2 years, while I was mourning my wife and trying to hold my family together, Eleanor had been waging a war I didn't know existed, gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for the day when love wouldn't be enough to protect me from greed. The journal was her war diary, page after page of observations, dates, dollar amounts. The gradual erosion of respect that started with small complaints and grew into outright theft. The way Melissa convinced Daniel that I was becoming a burden. The planning sessions where they calculated my net worth like I was already dead. On May 15th, Melissa told her sister I probably have early dementia. No medical basis for this claim, but she's building a narrative for legal proceedings. June 3rd, found credit card statement addressed to Harold but for account I don't recognize. $400 charged at luxury shopping center. Melissa's jewelry matches receipts. August 12th. Daniel asked about life insurance policies. When I said they were private, he became angry. First time he's raised his voice to me since childhood. Entry after entry, building a picture of systematic abuse that would have continued until they'd taken everything. The house, the savings, the dignity I'd spent 74 years earning. My phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't recognize. My dad, they're saying I could get 10 years. Please don't let them destroy my life over this money. The message was pathetic, desperate, exactly what I'd expected. Not an apology for what he'd done. Not acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Just fear of consequences and a plea for mercy he hadn't shown me. I deleted it without responding. The bank manager knocked on the privacy booth door. "Mr. Morrison, there's someone here to see you, says it's urgent." Agent Morrison, still no relation, still one of life's cosmic jokes, stood in the lobby with his cheap suit and expensive briefcase. His face was grim as winter weather. "Mr. Morrison, we need to talk. There's been a development." We sat in his car in the bank parking lot while he opened a folder thick enough to stop bullets. Crime scene photos, financial records, documents I couldn't identify but that made his jaw tighten as he reviewed them. "Your daughter-in-law has been busy," he said. "We've traced the financial fraud back 7 years. Multiple fake accounts, identity theft, mail fraud, but that's not why I'm here." He pulled out a photograph. Melissa in handcuffs, but not from yesterday's arrest. This was older, grainier, taken from a surveillance camera. This is from Tucson, Arizona, 2019. Different name, same scam. She bilked an elderly man out of $85,000 before his nephew figured out what was happening. The air in the car suddenly felt too thin. "Are you saying she's done this before?" "3 times that we can prove. Different cities, different identities, but the same pattern. Target elderly men with assets, gain their trust, isolate them from family members who might interfere, then systematically drain their accounts." The photograph fell from my numb fingers. "What about the other victims?" Agent Morrison's face went stone hard. 2 of them died before cases could be prosecuted. Natural causes officially, but both had significant changes to their wills shortly before death. Changes that left everything to women who disappeared right after probate was completed. The implication hung in the air like poisonous gas. Melissa hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been killing people. "Oh, what about Daniel?" The words came out as a whisper. We don't know how much he knew. Could be he was another victim, could be he was complicit from the start. "But Mr. Morrison..." Agent Morrison leaned forward, his eyes intense as laser beams. "You need to understand. If you hadn't fought back when you did, you'd probably be dead within 6 months." The drive home passed in a blur of sick realization. Every kindness Melissa had shown me, every moment of seeming concern had been calculation. Every time she'd encouraged me to rest more, eat less, take the medication she prepared for me, she'd been moving me closer to whatever end she'd planned. And Daniel, my son, my boy, the child I'd raised to know right from wrong. He'd either been her willing accomplice or too weak to stop her when he figured out what she was doing. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Not just empty, but infected. Every surface she'd touched, every room where she'd pretended to care about my welfare, every conversation where she'd convinced me she was trying to help, all of it contaminated by the knowledge of what she really was. Mrs. Patterson's casserole dish was still on the counter, washed and waiting to be returned. Such a normal thing, such an ordinary reminder of the life I'd almost lost without even knowing I was fighting for it. The phone started ringing at 4:30. I let it go to the machine. "Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Kowalski. We need you to come in tomorrow to give a formal statement. There have been additional developments in your case. More evidence, more victims. More proof that the woman who'd sat at my dinner table and planned my destruction was a predator who'd been hunting people like me for years." I pulled out Eleanor's journal and read it again, looking for signs I'd missed. Warning signals that might have saved me sooner if I'd been paying attention. October 2nd. Melissa asked about my heart medication today. Wanted to know if I'd noticed any changes in effectiveness. Strange question from someone with no medical background. November 18th. Harold mentioned feeling dizzy after dinner. Same symptoms my friend Martha described before her husband died. Should I be worried about the food? December 1st. Found empty pill bottles in Melissa's purse. Same medication Harold takes, but the labels were different. Why would she have them? Eleanor had suspected, had seen the pattern forming, had tried to protect me in the only way she could, by gathering evidence for a war she knew was coming. The sunset through my living room window was the color of old blood, painting everything in shades of red and amber. I sat in my recliner and thought about the victims Agent Morrison had described. Men like me, probably. Men who'd worked hard, saved money, built lives they wanted to protect and pass on to people they loved. Men who'd trusted the wrong people and paid for it with everything. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my palm, marking seconds that suddenly felt borrowed. If Eleanor hadn't prepared for this, if I hadn't fought back when I did, those seconds would have been numbered. Melissa would have gotten her hands on my medications, my will, my life. And Daniel would have let her. The phone rang again. Different number this time, but I recognized the area code. Arlington County Jail. Dad, please. I know you're angry, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. She told me you were getting sicker, that you needed help. I thought we were doing the right thing. Daniel's voice was hollow, defeated, echoing from the concrete walls that would be his home for the foreseeable future. Still making excuses, still trying to shift blame away from choices he'd made with open eyes. I love you, Dad. I know I screwed up, but I love you. Please don't let them destroy my life over this. The line went dead. Maximum calling time expired. I erased the message without saving it. Outside, the streetlights were coming on, casting pools of yellow illumination on pavement where I'd taught my son to ride a bicycle, where I'd watched him grow from boy to man to something I no longer recognized. Tomorrow there would be more questions, more evidence, more revelations about the depths of their betrayal. Tomorrow I would have to decide what kind of justice I wanted, what price they should pay for trying to erase me from my own life. But tonight I was alive. Tonight I was free. Tonight I was sitting in my own house, breathing my own air, making my own choices about what came next. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, and for the first time in months the sound felt like a celebration. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in courtroom 7 of the Arlington County Circuit Court, looking down at 2 people I barely recognized. Melissa sat between her lawyers like a cornered animal, her designer clothes replaced by orange jail scrubs, her perfectly styled hair hanging limp around a face that had aged decades since her arrest. Daniel wouldn't look at me. He stared at the table in front of him, his shoulders hunched, his hands shaking slightly as he scribbled notes on a legal pad. My son, who'd once been proud to walk beside me, now couldn't bear the sight of the man whose life he'd tried to steal. Your Honor. I said, my voice carrying easily through the courtroom's hushed silence. I've been asked to give a victim impact statement, to tell you how their crimes affected my life. Judge Martinez nodded, her dark eyes compassionate but firm. She'd presided over financial crimes for 15 years, but even she'd seemed shocked by the evidence in this case. I could tell you about the money, I continued. About the $347,000 they stole through forged documents and fraudulent accounts. I could tell you about the house they tried to take, the dignity they stripped away, the fear I lived with for months as they convinced me I was losing my mind. In the gallery behind me, Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, her presence a solid reminder that some people understand loyalty. Beside her, 3 strangers, relatives of Melissa's other victims who'd flown in to watch justice finally catch up with a woman who'd thought she was untouchable. But the real damage wasn't financial, I said, my eyes finding Daniel's bent head. The real damage was learning that my own son could watch his wife poison my food and say nothing, could listen to her plan my murder and choose to protect her instead of me. Melissa's head snapped up at the word murder. Her lawyer's hand shot out to silence her, but not before she'd made a sound like a wounded animal. The poisoning had been Agent Morrison's discovery. Melissa had been adding small amounts of digoxin to my evening medication. Not enough to kill me immediately, but enough to weaken my heart, gradually create the kind of medical emergency that would look natural for a man my age. The plan was elegant in its cruelty: make me sick enough to need constant care, then use my deteriorating condition to justify taking control of my finances. The defendant has shown no remorse. I continued, looking directly at Melissa now. Even after her arrest, she continued to insist she was trying to help me. She told investigators that I was better off dead than living as a burden to my family. The courtroom was silent except for the soft scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. Even the bailiffs had gone still, listening to words that cut through legal proceedings like truth through lies. As for my son, I paused, watching Daniel's shoulders shake with silent sobs. As for my son, I want the court to know that he made his choice. When presented with evidence that his wife was slowly killing me, he chose to help her cover it up rather than call the police. Daniel's lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea deal based on coercion, claiming Melissa had manipulated him into compliance. But Eleanor's recordings told a different story. They showed a man who'd known exactly what was happening and decided his inheritance was worth more than his father's life. Your Honor, I said, my voice growing stronger as I reached the heart of what I'd come to say. These 2 people looked at a 74-year-old man and saw nothing but dollar signs. They saw someone disposable, someone whose remaining years were less valuable than their immediate desires. I pulled out the pocket watch, held it so the light caught its silver surface. This watch was given to me by my father when I turned 18. He told me that time reveals character, and that the measure of a man isn't what he builds, but what he's willing to destroy to get what he wants. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was destroying my son to save myself, just as he'd tried to destroy me to enrich himself. But there was a difference. I was fighting for truth, for justice, for the principle that some betrayals are too deep to forgive. I ask that you sentence them both to the maximum penalty allowed by law, I concluded. Not because I'm angry, though I am. Not because I want revenge, though I do. But because they represent a danger to every elderly person in this country who trusts their children to protect them instead of prey on them. So I folded the statement and stepped down from the podium. As I walked past the defense table, Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were red with tears, his face hollow with the knowledge of what he'd thrown away. "Hey, Dad," he whispered the word barely audible. "Please." I stopped, looked down at him one last time. Saw the boy who'd once brought me Father's Day cards made from construction paper and crayon. Saw the man who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral and promised to take care of me. Saw the stranger who'd tried to kill me for money. "I hope someday you understand," I said quietly. "I hope someday you realize that the man you were trying to murder was the only person who ever loved you unconditionally." Judge Martinez delivered the sentences 2 hours later. Melissa got 25 years for murder, conspiracy, elder abuse, financial fraud, and being a career criminal who'd preyed on vulnerable seniors across 3 states. She would be 71 when she got out, assuming she lived that long in prison. Daniel got 12 years for conspiracy, financial fraud, and accessory to attempted murder. His lawyer had managed to convince the judge that he'd been manipulated, that he'd been as much a victim as a perpetrator. I wasn't sure I believed that, but it didn't matter anymore. As they led them away in shackles, Melissa turned back one last time. Her face was twisted with rage and something that might have been genuine surprise. "You'll die alone," she screamed, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls. "You'll die alone and forgotten, and nobody will care." The bailiff silenced her with a firm hand, but her words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would die alone, but I would die free in my own house, surrounded by memories of a woman who'd loved me enough to protect me even from the grave. That night, Mrs. Patterson and I sat on my front porch drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies dance in the growing darkness. She'd made another casserole, chicken and rice this time, and we'd eaten it while sharing comfortable silence and memories of better days. "Any regrets?" she asked as the grandfather clock chimed 10 times from inside the house. I thought about the question seriously. Regrets about fighting back, about destroying my son's life, about choosing justice over family loyalty. "Just one," I said finally. "I regret that Eleanor had to spend her last months planning for a war I was too blind to see coming." Mrs. Patterson nodded, understanding without explanation. "That's the gift of old friends. They know which silences contain love and which contain sorrow." The phone inside had been ringing all day. Reporters, documentary producers, people who wanted to turn my story into their content. But I'd learned something important in the months since the arrest. Other people's curiosity about your pain doesn't obligate you to satisfy it. My story belonged to me. My victory belonged to me. My choice to forgive or not forgive, to remember or forget, to move forward or stand still, all of it belonged to me. 3 weeks later, I donated the house to a charity that helps elderly people fight financial abuse. I kept enough money to rent a small apartment downtown close to the library and the diner where Greg and I had breakfast every Tuesday morning. The new owners were a young couple with 2 children and a dog that barked too much. But they treated the house with respect, appreciated the craftsmanship in the hardwood floors and custom cabinets. They understood that homes have memories and some memories deserve to be honored. I kept the pocket watch. Time still needed to be marked, character still needed to be revealed, and somewhere out there other elderly people were learning the difference between family and predators. Sometimes Daniel called from prison. I never answered, but I listened to the messages. They started angry, blaming me for destroying his life, for choosing strangers over blood. Then they grew pleading, asking for money, for commissary, for lawyers, for appeals. Now they were just sad, empty apologies that came too late to matter. I erased them all without saving. On quiet nights, when the apartment grew too still and the silence too complete, I would take out Eleanor's journal and read her observations about love and betrayal, about the difference between protecting someone and enabling them. "Harold needs to see this through to the end," she'd written in her final entry. "He needs to understand that some people can't be saved from themselves. My job is to make sure he survives their choices." She'd done her job perfectly. She'd saved me from people who'd looked at my love and seen weakness, who'd mistaken patience for stupidity, who'd believed that age made me vulnerable instead of wise. The pocket watch ticked steadily on my nightstand, marking time that was mine again. Time to read books I'd never had time for. Time to take walks without asking permission. Time to decide each morning who I wanted to be that day. Time to live. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Daniel. Not a phone call or a recorded message, but an actual letter written in pencil on lined paper. His handwriting was shaky, uncertain, like he'd forgotten how to form words by hand. "Dad, I know you probably won't read this, but I had to try. I've been in counseling trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could do what I did to you. The therapist says I need to take responsibility without making excuses, so here it is. I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry about the consequences, sorry that I hurt you, sorry that I forgot who raised me, sorry that I chose money over love. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I understand why. But I wanted you to know that I remember now. I remember who you were, who you tried to teach me to be. I remember the man who worked 2 jobs to buy my school clothes, who taught me to change a tire, who held me when I cried over my first broken heart. I threw all of that away for a woman who would have killed you without blinking. I know that now. I know what I am, what I became, and I know it's too late to change any of it. I just wanted you to know that I remember who you were, and I'm sorry I forgot. Danny. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with Eleanor's journal. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. But acknowledgement that somewhere inside the man who'd betrayed me, a piece of the boy I'd raised still existed. That had to be enough. The pocket watch chimed midnight as I turned off the bedside lamp. Another day ending, another day beginning. Time moving forward the way it always had, indifferent to human plans and betrayals and the small victories that keep us alive. Outside my window, the city hummed with the quiet activity of night. Shift workers heading home, emergency vehicles responding to crises, people living their lives in the spaces between one sunrise and the next. I was 75 years old. I had survived war, loss, betrayal, and attempted murder. I had learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that love can't prevent cruelty, and that sometimes the people who try to destroy you do you the favor of showing you how strong you really are. The watch ticked steadily in the darkness, marking time that belonged to me, and for the first time in years, that was enough.